The air is impossibly thin, like the ghost of breath instead of breath itself. You stand at the edge of a high ambient terrace, somewhere above 10,000 feet, wrapped in a kind of wool poncho that smells faintly of dust and last year's potatoes. Below you, the sacred valley folds itself in layers of stone, corn, and stubborn green. It's early morning, and the mist clings to everything like it forgot where it put its keys. You shift your weight, adjusting to the slope. Somewhere in the distance, a llama chews with the intense philosophical focus of a retired scholar. The sky is the color of goulash, and you've already forgotten what the sun feels like. It's going to be a long day, but don't worry. You probably won't make it through this one. Before we wander too far down these stone paths carved by someone who didn't believe in the wheel, take a slow, sleepy breath. If you enjoy drifting through ancient civilizations while your spine melts into your mattress, consider liking unsubscribing. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your sleepy corner of the world. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You follow a young boy through narrow terraces, each step bringing you closer to something invisible, a way of remembering that doesn't involve writing at all. His tunic is dyed in natural indigo, and HES holding a bundle of what looks like tangled ropes. But they're not tangled. Not at all. These are quipas bundles of dyed, knotted strings used by the Incas to record information. And when we say record, we don't mean journal entries or grocery lists. These were X documents, census logs, calendar dates, possibly even poetry stored in the humble knot. No ink. No paper. No loud declarations. Just threatened silence. It's all a bit like encoding your deepest secrets into a shoelace and trusting your descendants to untie the right emotions. You reach a small tambo, an Incan roadside way station that's somehow both minimal and elegant. A stone rectangle with a thatched roof and a view even Airbnbs would envy. The messenger boy is met by a gray minus-haired man who looks like HES been aged by altitude and suspicion. They greet each other in Quechua, the musical language of the Andes, full of sounds like water skipping across stones. The boy hands him the quipu, and for a moment there is only the sound of wind through barley. The man runs his fingers over the knots like a pianist with no piano. Each knot's placement, tightness, color, and position on the chord tells a part of the story. Historians know that the Incas used to base minus and decimal system, and quipas could be astonishingly accurate in calculating things like the number of alpacas in a village or how many bundles of maize were owed to the state. But here's the kicker: we still don't fully understand how to read them. Some parts are clear, yes, we decoded the numbers, but others, possibly the narrative parts, remain a mystery. Scholars argue whether quipas contain spoken language or if they were more like memory prompts, and honestly, no one seems entirely sure. Which is either thrilling or deeply frustrating, depending on how much sleep you've had. The old man nods, wraps the quipu back into a leather pouch, and begins walking to the next village. You follow, your breath forming pale clouds that vanish into this paper, minus thin world. Along the way, you pass through fields of potatoes, more varieties than your grocery store ever admitted existed. One potato looks like it's judging you. Another might be smiling. Or maybe you're just lightheaded. You stop at a resting stone, a charka-rumi designed specifically for travelers like you who need to sit for a moment and contemplate the universe, or their knees. And as you sit, the landscape tells its own story, the steppe terraces that cling to cliffs like green fingerprints. The woven reed baskets drying in the sun, the quiet dignity of a civilization that built with stone, counted with string, and ruled without ever inventing a written alphabet. Sleepy fact: the Inca Empire stretched over 2,500 miles without the use of wheels, iron tools, or a writing system. Just feet, fiber, and faith. Now the messenger is getting smaller in the distance, just a shape on the road, and you rise slowly, the stone warming your back like a kind parent. The wind whispers through the grasses, telling you it's time to move on. You walk the narrow trail carved into the spine of the Andes, its edges worn by centuries of sandaled feet and possibly the occasional panicked llama. The sky is bluer now, in a sleepy kind of way, as if even the sun is pacing itself. The messenger with the quipu has vanished into the horizon, and so you trail behind slowly, as if moving too fast might erase the past. Remember the tambo you visited earlier? That same dusty little hut with stone benches and the panoramic view of eternity. Well, they're all over this road system, Iqapacanan, the Great Inca Road. It stretches for over 25,000 miles across mountains, deserts, and forests. No GPS. No signs. Just knowledge passed on from generation to generation, like how to fold a fitted sheet or how not to insult your mother in minus law. A young woman appears beside you. She's balancing a clay pot on her head with the kind of elegance that makes your shoulders ache in sympathy. She doesn't speak, just nods, and begins to walk with you. She's headed toward a nearby administrative center, where the local Quipu Keeper Quipu AMAOC will take stock of the region's resources. The Incas loved structure. Everything had a place. Every person had a role. Even your hypothetical Inca self probably had a designated seat at the Festival of the Sun and a chore list longer than a modern weddings or SVP spreadsheet. As you reach the village, a llama greets you with what you interpret as indifference. They've seen it all before. Children dart between stone alleys, laughing, chasing a wooden hoop. A woman crushes corn with a smooth stone, humming a lullaby older than your country. You enter the main square. A shaded platform, or as new, rises in the center, a place for announcements, ceremonies, and what might pass for passive-aggressive town meetings. On one side, an elderly man sits cross-legged, surrounded by bundles of colorful cords. Ah yes, the Quipu AMAOC himself. He doesn't look up as you approach. His fingers move slowly, deliberately, through a curtain of knots dyed in casino reds and indigo blues. To the untrained eye, it's a tangle. To him, it's an archive. Population counts, crop yields, marriage records, military readiness, all strung up in silence. You watch as he ties a new cord tight, short knots near the top, looser ones farther down. A touch of green, a twist, a spacing so exact you wonder if he's secretly an accountant in disguise. There's no paper trail, but there's definitely a string trail. Historians believe that each Quipu may have been used by only one Quipu AMAOC, like a personal journal you never want anyone else to decode. And yet, some believe these knots also served as memory aids in storytelling, a kind of oral minus scripted hybrid performance. The truth? Still up for debate. Some scholars have even found quipus buried with children, suggesting sentimental or symbolic meanings too. You notice one cord colored with a rare yellow fiber, possibly dyed with Q-O flowers. This was just data. It was textile poetry. Suddenly, the man looks up and says something softly. The woman beside you translates. He says this Quipu tells the story of a village lost to frost. All its potato stores failed. But one man saved seeds in clay jars underground. He didn't speak of it. Just left them by the temple. You nod, pretending to understand more than you do. But really, you just want to sit near this man and listen to the sound of knots clicking together like wooden beads. There's peace in this data tied with purpose, life recorded without spectacle. Obscure tidbit times some quipus were so elaborate, they had up to 1,500 strings imagined trying to find your car keys in that mess. The afternoon drifts on. A child brings the Quipu AMAOC a bowl of chicha, fermented corn beer, frothy and pink. He drinks slowly, smiles, and continues his work. You take a seat under a low, minus hanging roof. The shadows are long now, crawling across the square like quiet gossip. Someone is cooking something earthy, maybe tubers roasted in ash. A dog yawns nearby with the intensity of a sage. And as you close your eyes for a moment, lulled by the rhythm of fingers on thread, you realize this is how they remembered things. Not with noise, not with pens, but with fiber, color, silence, and trust. The past doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it just knots itself into patience. The village begins to breathe with its usual rhythm-woven baskets stacked high, wool stretched taut on looms, and the soft thud of sandals against hard minus-packed earth. You lean back against a stone wall smoothed by the backs of centuries of other leaders. It's not exactly a reclining chair, but it'll do. A woman beside you is carding alpaca wool, drawing the strands through her fingers like she's spinning strands of memory. She hums the same tune you heard earlier, low, circular, as if the melody itself refuses to end. It's the kind of tune you don't remember learning but somehow know. And now, as shadows grow deeper, a new figure enters the scene. Dressed in ochre and gray, a Chazgui, a relay runner, comes into the plaza with the elegance of someone who's absolutely not in a hurry. He carries no pack, no weapons. Just a small satchel tucked beneath his arm, probably lined with coca leaves and, of course, another quipue. The Chazgui system was the backbone of the Inca Empire's communication, a human postal service on steroids. These runners could cover up to 150 miles per day using relay stations Tambo-S and sheer willpower fueled by coca and stubborn pride. Chazgui didn't carry letters or scrolls, just oral messages in those cryptic bundles of knots. And sometimes a verbal code to unlock them. You watch as this Chazgui bows slightly to the quip you see. MAOC exchanges a few quick words and hands over his knotted message. A soft conversation follows low tones, names, numbers. No shouting, no drama. Just information, gently handed over like a sleeping child. Curious, you move closer and notice this quipue is different. The knots are uneven, some of them doubled over in what seems like hesitation. It's messier, less perfect, like someone tied at mid-minus storm. The older man frowns and touches one knot in particular. That one, says the woman beside you, translating again, means there's been a mudslide. A road is gone. A dozen fields are buried. But one tear still holds. They say a farmer sang into the mountain, and the earth moved around him. You look at the knot again. It's tight, painfully tight, like the kind of memory that never stops aching. Historians theorize that beyond numbers, some quipus carried narrative weight. Patterns could symbolize disaster or triumph, or encode events in communal memory. But we're still deciphering their language, if it is a language. Some experts argue that the quipus worked in tandem with oral storytelling, prompting the keeper to recite a tale. Others believe the knots worst and long sentences, written in a tactile dialect we simply lost. And now here you are, staring at a woolen sentence, unsure whether it's a census, a tragedy, or both. As the sun slips below the peaks, the quipusi MAOC begins to light a small fire. Not for warmth, for clarity. The threads must be seen in good light, he says. Shadow misleads the fingers. And just like that, the past is filtered through flickering flame. Around the fire, others gather. A boy brings maize to roast. Someone pours more chicha, its foam catching the firelight. The mood isn't solemn, it's quiet, but communal. Like everyone knows the earth is moody but forgives easily. Obscure fact incoming Incan runners sometimes carried conch shells to announce their arrival. Imagine being greeted not with a knock, but with the sound of the sea, high in the mountains. As you chew on a roasted kernel, warm and faintly sweet, the woman with the alpaca wool speaks again. "We remember together," she says. If he forgets the knots, I remind him. If I forget the story, he corrects me. It's not about perfect preservation. It's about shared remembering. One knotted thread prompts a story. The story prompts laughter. The laughter becomes the memory. You realize this is how civilizations survive together around a fire, without needing to write a single word. You lie back on the cool earth, the stars thick above you. A Southern Cross leans gently to one side, like it's had a long day too. Llamas grunt somewhere behind you, and someone's child lets out a short, sleepy whimper before settling into their woven blanket. The quipu is folded once more, stored in a pouch, its job done. But the story it carried that lives on, now spoken, now shared, now yours. And so you sleep under the soft night of empire, feeling that maybe, just maybe, this is how history should be told, not shouted in scrolls, but whispered in string. By dawn, the sky is the color of boiled ashen llama spit, unimpressive but functional. The villagers begin their quiet shuffle into the fields, shoulders hunched, eyes squinting into the new day like it's a suspicious neighbor. You, on the other hand, are remarkably well minus rested for someone who slept under a stone ledge next to a snoring goat. The woman who spoke with you yesterday gestures for you to follow. Today, she says, the quipu goes to the meter records labor quotas. That means a journey. That means more walking. That means sandals, elevation, and the quiet thrill of mandatory civic duty. The meter system was the inconversion of taxes, only instead of money, you gave time. Every able-bodied person knowed the state weeks or months of labor building roads, farming state land, working in mines. The empire ran on it. Not always fairly, but efficiently depending on whether you were giving or getting. As you walk beside her, she explains that this particular quipu details how many villagers still owe their meter this cyclone, what kind of work they're assigned. Purple cords for agriculture, brown for construction, green for textiles, and black means mining, which is either prestigious or punishment depending on the shaft. You ask how she keeps all this straight. She laughs, a deep chuckle that implies your question is the equivalent of asking how someone remembers their own name. By walking it, she says. You walk it, you tie it, you speak it. You don't forget the thread you tie with your own breath. The path narrows again. You cross an ancient suspension bridge made of woven grass and quiet dread. It creaks, sways, sighs, and somehow holds. These QES Huachaca bridges were rebuilt annually by local villagers, a community ritual involving engineering, ceremony, and large quantities of mutual side-by-side. Obscure tidbit for today, chewing coca leaves was not only common but part of religious offerings. Priests even read fortunes and how the chewed leaves scattered. Imagine your horoscope depending on leafy spit art. You arrive at a larger administrative center, a cluster of stone buildings, each one precisely rectangular, as if designed by someone who feared curves. A new QUIPUC stands waiting, younger, stern, and wearing a tunic dyed in sun-bleached saffron. He accepts the quipu with formal gestures. There's no ceremony, just respect. No one claps. No one bows. They just acknowledge as though the strings are sacred, but not precious. Like bread or fire. He begins to examine the cords, counting knots, flipping strands, nodding slowly. Then comes the part you didn't expect. He calls over a scribe. Now, here's the plot twist. After the Spanish arrived, some QUIPUC began working alongside colonizers, converting quipus into Roman-letter records. This young man writes the quipus contents into a worn ledger, glancing up with the haunted eyes of someone who used to dream in threatened, now dreams in ink. You look around and feel the first stirrings of fracture. The woman beside you whispers, soon, they will stop letting us die the stories. Soon they will only let us speak them, and even then, only in their tongue. Historians debate whether the Spanish truly understood when they banned the use of quipas in the 1582. To them, it was superstition. To the Inca, it was memory. But today, in this moment, the threads still hold power. The knots are still read. The fields are still planted. The meter is still tallied. A breeze lifts one of the chords, and it dances like a forgotten line of poetry. Maybe this is why they tied them, to keep even the wind accountable. Use it beside the wall while the count continues. A pot of boiled maize simmers nearby. Someone hands you a rough ceramic cup of hot coca tea. Bitter, earthy, with a taste of survival. As you sip, your eyes drift toward the horizon. Beyond it lies Cusco, the navel of the world, the heart of the empire. And somewhere there, you imagine, is a room filled with thousands of quipas, each one humming quietly with stories no one can read anymore. Not yet, anyway, but someday. And for now, the knots still whisper. You leave the administrative center behind, your sandals tapping along the familiar rhythm of Inca stonework. Each step fits a little too perfectly, like the road remembers every previous footfall, like it's slightly offended that you even hesitated. You walk alongside the woman with the coca-minus-colored shawl, who's now humming something either a planting song or a veiled insult about today's weather. The sky is already rehearsing its evening colors, and your e's still marching eastward, toward a village that has somehow earned a reputation for particularly beautiful knots. Not in fashion, no one here is talking about quipu couture. These are said to be aesthetic knots, tied not just for counting but for beauty. Artful chords. Sentences embroidered in string. Along the way, you pass another suspension bridge, this one repaired just weeks ago by a team of villagers chanting rhythmically as they looped grass into the old framework. Someone tied a charm to one of the side ropes, 3 dried coca leaves and a small carved bird. Protection from wind, maybe. Or spiders. Or both. As you climb higher, the air thins, and so do your thoughts. The landscape is doing that dramatic Andean thing where it looks like it could collapse into the clouds or fly away with the next breeze. But here you are, still grounded, still wrapped in wool, still walking toward a knot. The village appears suddenly, like it's been waiting for you behind a hill all along. Small stone homes hug the mountainside. Your greeted not with fanfare, but a polite nod from a man who's clearly judging your calves. He leads you to a house with a low roof and wide doorway. Inside, light filters through a reed-covered window, casting woven shadows across the floor. And there are dozens of quipas hanging from a horizontal beam like a curtain of thought, each string swaying slightly with the draft. The man introduces himself as Yuponque. He is a specialist in ceremonial quipas. That's right, not just the practical, tax-minus paying kind. These knots are designed for festivals, offerings, and stories. The poetic register of the empire. Think of it like opera but quiet, portable, and wearable. He pulls 1 cord for a day-long bass string, dyed in layers of rust and indigo, with smaller offshoot cords forming deliberate triangles and tiny coils. This, he says with reverence, is the harvest celebration from 3 winters ago. You peer at it like someone inspecting a friend's baby photo. You see knots more complex than usual. Some loop twice, some with tiny spacers, some barely there at all, as if the air between them is doing the remembering. He explains that certain sequences are not mathematical at all. They're symbolic. A pattern of loops might represent rainfall. A rare white knot might mean snow in the dry season. A wide space between chords. A year of abundance. Or death. Or both. Even he admits that sometimes he doesn't know. Some meanings are only meant for the one who ties them, he shrugs. And sometimes even they forget. This is the scholarly headache and charm of Quipus. For every system we've managed to decode, yes, decimal structure, color categorization. Not hierarchies, there's an entire realm of meaning built on context, tradition, and probably just a little mischief. Some believe these chords held coded stories, myth cycles, genealogies, histories passed down by touch. Others argue that ceremonial quipus weren't meant to be read but felt. Historians still debate whether these aesthetic quipus were sacred texts or just really pretty spreadsheets. Yupunque picks up another bundle, this one with elaborate braiding and a single dried flower still tucked into one of the loops. This one, he says softly, is for someone who died without a burial. We tie these for the spirits to guide them home. You let that settle into your rickbitch. He shows you how to tie a basic knot the right way. No double minus loop cheat codes. No sailor's shortcuts. The trick is tension. Not too tight, not too loose. Like telling a secret, you don't entirely want to be heard. You try. Yours comes out looking like a sad pretzel. He nods anyway. It remembers, he says. And so use it. The two of you weaving silence together, slowly. The sun tilts further west. Outside, a dog barks at absolutely nothing with conviction. Someone stirs apart. Time unspools like yarn. Yori handed a small bundle as you leave your first quipu. It's not official, of course, but it holds something. The day. The work. The trying. The not minus quite minus right knot. You tie it around your wrist. It fits. As you step outside, the sky stretches white and tired. You pass a field where children are playing. One of them is pretending to be a Chaw's key, racing with a bundle of yarn tied around their waist. The others cheer him on, even though he trips on a root and rolls dramatically into the dust. Oscar minus worthy. They'll remember it. Probably won't write it down. But maybe someone will tie it. Maybe someone already has. The next day, you descend from the ceremonial village with stiff calves and a surprisingly full heart. You've left behind the artful quipus, but taken something with you, an understanding, or at least an appreciation, that data can feel. The road takes you toward a Tambo's cluster, a kind of bureaucratic co-minus-de-minus sack, where all the numbers and strings eventually come to rest and, presumably, gossip about each other. This is where officials tally the Empire's vast output. Potatoes, wool, corn, taxes, census counts. Yes, the Incas conducted censuses. Multiple times a year, in fact. Your modern government barely manages one per decade. Just saying. The Tamboes here are larger, cleaner. Government minus issue. Abit's mug, if buildings can be smug. You're greeted by two functionaries who seem less friendly and more precise. Their tunics are wrinkle minus free. Their sandals match. Their hair is parted. It's all very unsettling. Inside the main hall, you see shelves. Wooden shelves stacked with bundled quipus wrapped in leather. And here, they aren't hanging like poetry. They're coiled like records. Carefully stored, labeled with symbols, sorted by date and province. This is less firelight and song, and more department of threads. A man with a jaguar minus tooth necklace greets you. His name is Paxi. He is the lead archivist. His voice is dry, his eyes sharper than obsidian, and his respect for knots is nearly religious. He guides you to a large open room, where a circle of quipuca may OCS sit with their strings spread out in concentric patterns. This is not amateur hour. These are the elite string interpreters. He explains that each quip you get cross-minus checked by multiple experts before final confirmation. It's the Andean version of peer review, only instead of red pens, they just sigh and rate high knots. You watch as one man pauses over a dark blue strand, tilts his head, then carefully shifts one knot up by half an inch. There, he mutters. Now it agrees with the wool records from the coast. You're unsure whether to be impressed or mildly terrified. Historical fact incoming: the Incas had no currency. 0 coins. Everything was bartered or counted as labor and redistributed centrally. That's right, no taxes in money, just offerings of time, grain, cloth, or service. In other words, socialism with cliffs. Paxi shows you equip you used for cattle equivalency. Turns out 1 llama equals roughly 5 guinea pigs. But that also depends on weight, age, and fluff. This is real economic theory, folks. It's just wearing fur. The real marvel, however, is a wall-minus mounted master equip you dozens of cords spanning floor to ceiling, like a knotted tapestry of empire. It records a regional audit from 2 years prior: deaths, births, marriages, planting schedules, disasters, owns, storage, surplus. It's basically the entire LinkedIn ancestry, com, and Dropbox of this district. You approach it slowly. Some knots are nearly worn smooth from handling. A few cords are missing, cut, faded, replaced. Paxi notes, some updates require revisions. And then, casually, sometimes, memories must be adjusted. You raise an eyebrow. It doesn't elaborate. Scholars still argue whether edits to quipas were permitted or taboo. Was the knot sacred and immutable, or just a temporary notation? The lack of surviving instruction manuals is really killing the vibe here. Obscure fact for the night: in some regions, women were trained QIPUC-AMOCS. Rare, but not impossible. Threads, it seems, bend more than laws do. You leave the archive with your head full of cords. You swear you see patterns everywhere: on your sleeves, in the bark of a tree, even the way someone braids their daughter's hair. Suddenly, everything feels like it might mean something more than it seems. You stop at the edge of a terrace as the sun drops behind a jagged ridge. The fields below you are marked with furrows, some recent, some not. The breeze carries the scent of clay, firewood, and fermented maize. You remember your sad little knot from the night before. You touch it. You understand just a bit more now. Not all stories are told in ink, and not all memory lives in the mind. Some of it, if you're lucky, lives in the thread. You wake to the sound of wooden flutes playing somewhere far off, slow and circular, like someone coaxing dreams out of the mist. The kind of sound that feels round in your chest and flat in your knees. You're in another tambo, this one tucked along the lower edge of a valley where clouds roll in like they own the place, and honestly, they kind of do. The wool blanket trapped around you is coarse but worn. Beside you, a kettle sputters over a coal fire, puffing out steam that smells faintly of mint and mountain. Someone's already moving outside, muffled steps, voices low enough to be mistaken for wind. You sit up slowly, as if your limbs need convincing. Today you've been invited, yes, invited to visit a village known not for its economy or its temples, but for its memory keepers. Elders, all of them, who are considered walking libraries. Not just oral historians, but living indexes of the old quipas. They don't interpret new chords anymore. They remember the ones that no one else does. It's a 2-hour walk, uphill, through scrubland and rocky patches that make your ankles write angry letters to your future self. Along the way, you guide an older woman named Mama Eche points out landmarks. That hollow truck used to be a fertility shrine. That collapsed wall, it housed the old thread minus dyers. That tree that looks like a llama with arthritis. They say it's cursed, but only on Tuesdays. The village appears suddenly, like it rose out of the fog just for you. It's small, maybe 20 homes, and every one of them features a carved lintel over the door, each a variation of spirals, birds, and chords. The symbolism is not subtle. Here, everything remembers. You'll lead to a central plaza where four elders sit beneath a stretched wool canopy. Each one is wrapped in heavy cloaks and wears a different colored sash, denoting their district and expertise. One of them wears earrings shaped like tiny knotted threads. She catches your eye and raises a brow like she's known you for decades. Use it. They nod. No one rushes the moment. Eventually, one begins to speak. She describes a quipu that once hung in the temple near Cuzco, long before the Spaniards arrived. Its chords told of a season where rain never came, but the people danced anyway, and the clouds returned. Another elder nods and picks up the thread figuratively and literally describing how the knots for drought were always tied with an extra twist, like a clenched fist. You realize these four are doing something no one else can. They're translating without touching. They're drawing full accounts from memory, based on knots that haven't existed for decades. This, they explain, is the last level of the quip. You are not just tying or reading, but becoming the chord. The final keeper is not a recorder, but a storyteller, a witness. The chords are no longer there. The stories are. Scholars have long speculated about these final living quipas, human record minus holders whose minds were trained to mimic the logic of knots. There's evidence fragments of Spanish letters, reports from missionaries suggesting some elders could recite entire census records from memory, confirmed by chords that later vanished. And yet there are no surviving manuals. No definitive proof. Historians still argue whether this was fact, myth, or some rich Incan metaphor gone rogue. One elder stands her back like a drawn bow, her steps careful and brings out a single strand. It's not a full quipu, just a single cord, faded and frayed, with 3 old knots, loose as memory. She lays it in your hands. Tell us what you feel, she says. No pressure. You run your fingers over the thread. It's rough light, not quite symmetrical. The knots feel tired. You say the only thing that comes to mind, it feels like something meant to be held, not understood. They smile in unison. Exactly. Obscure tidbit for the day: certain knots were believed to influence the future. Farmers sometimes tied hope cords during planting, ritual threads meant to ensure yield. Early manifestation, but with fiber. You stay until evening, listening, asking, forgetting, remembering. No one judges you when you confuse one rain year with another. The keepers gently correct, as if guiding a child's hands over clay. As you prepare to leave, one slips a string into your hand. Just a small one. No knots. Just cord. Not everything has to be tied, she says. You walk away with the twilight curling around your feet like a lazy cat. The stories stay behind, drifting upward into the blue minus gray sky, where clouds of memory weave their own kind of fabric. The trail back down is steeper than you remember. That might be gravity or just humility. You pass the same twisted tree, still cursed, and descend into the lower valleys where the air thickens and the birds grow louder, bolder, more sarcastic. One flaps by, with what appears to be a stolen scrap of tunic. You salute its confidence. Today's stop is unexpected, a salt village built into the mountainside like someone sprinkled white sugar across the stone. These are the Mara's salt terraces, a patchwork of shallow pools that evaporate mineral minus rich water into edible history. You're greeted by salt workers, stoic, sun minus worn, with hands the color of the earth. And somewhere in their workshops it's an old quipu, protected under glass. It's brittle, faded, but unmistakable. Legend says it records salt allotments from over 4 centuries ago. Each cord corresponds to a terrace. The knot tightness indicates production output, and the color of minus white, beige, nearly pink tells you whether it was common salt or prized mineral crystal. You lean in close and notice one cord that ends in a frayed split. The guide shrugs. That one broke. Still counts. What's fascinating is that salt was more than seasoning. It was trade. It was medicine. It was ceremony. Entire llama caravans set out just to carry it through the empire, as valuable as gold but far more edible. The Quipulet Mars isn't ceremonial, poetic, or tragic. It's administrative. It's business. It's a spreadsheet in war. Historians sometimes gloss over these mundane quipus in favor of the dramatic ones: famines, royal births, war logs. But the salt ledger is a quiet kind of miracle, the sheer organization of empire through threatened memory. No parchment. No seal. Just a cord that says, Terrace 40, 3B underperformed. We're watching. Your guide offers you a chance to rake the salt. You take it. The rake is wooden, the salt soft underfoot, and your movement slow, part ritual, part work. The crystals form like stars in shallow pools. The sun catches them, and the whole place gleams like a wet quilt made of light. Obscure tidbit of the day: the Incas believed salt had spiritual purifying properties. It was sprinkled during ceremonies to banish bad luck, ghosts, and even Spanish invaders. The last one didn't work, unfortunately. Afterward, Yori given a small pouch of pink salt and a cordial goodbye. You walk down the path with a crunch under your sandals and the faint tang of minerals in your nose. Later that night, you reach another temple, this one beside a stream. You soak your feet. You tie your salt pouch to your belt. You check your little wrist quip, your private knot. Still there. As stars emerge again unbothered, as always you lie back on your blanket, wondering what your thread might say if someone finds it 500 years from now. Wandered too far. Ate too much maize. Learned a little. Slept well. A good record all in all. The next day, you wake with salt still caked between your toes and a vague dream of someone trying to barter you for 3 guinea pigs and a llama with a limp. It takes you a minute to remember where you are beside a rushing stream, at a tambo built just awkwardly enough to suggest it was placed by committee. The stone under your back is cold, but not unwelcoming. A beetle climbs over your blanket like it owns the lease. Today, you're heading toward a sacred site, not a temple, but something quieter, older, and arguably more mysterious: a burial cave known for housing the preserved remains of Quipulet CS. That's right, professional not minus keepers were sometimes interred with their quipus. Not their wealth, not their weapons, just their string. Because when your life is spent tying the Empire's memory, you don't really need a tombstone. You just need a thread that says, I was here and I remembered. The trail narrows. The trees thicken. A mist begins to gather low around your ankles, then slowly creeps up like a shy ghost that forgot its introduction. You hear birds, mostly rude ones, and spot the occasional rabbit darting between stones. It feels like the forest is watching you, or maybe waiting for you to forget something. Eventually, you arrive at the mouth of the cave. It doesn't announce itself. There are no grand pillars or carved lintels, just a rock face with a crease like a sleepy eyelid. A young man greets you. His name is Tika, and HES the caretaker. His job is part historian, part cleaner, part tour guide, and, according to him, part ghost negotiator. He leads you into the cave with a single candle. The darkness swallows the walls quickly. You walk slowly, trying not to trip on your own curiosity. Inside, the walls shimmer with mineral streaks, and the air smells like earth and old breath. At the far end of the chamber sit 3 woven bundles, perfectly preserved mummies wrapped in layers of wool, their faces drawn tight over skulls that once held stories. At their feet, quibus, dozens, hung like gardens, coiled like question marks, draped like whispers. Tika kneels beside one and points out a particular cord, faded, but still structured. This one, he says, was meant to be read by no one. A personal record. The keeper tied it and died. No one else ever touched it again. You look at the knots. They're tight. Precise. Intimate. The kind of knots you don't make unless you're trying to say something only the wind might overhear. It's not known whether these mummies were honored elders, political recorders, or part of a Quipusi guild. Some scholars argue the Quipas buried with them were ceremonial. Others insist they're personal logs, like an ancient diary you can't burn because it's woven into your legacy. Historians still debate whether these burial cords were meant to be read in the afterlife or simply carried as spiritual credentials. Hi, I'm here to meet the ancestors. Here's my resume. Tika shows you a smaller quip you kept in a clage, are beside the oldest bundle. This one's different, less formal, more chaotic. The knots are uneven. Some are almost playful. He suspects it belonged to an apprentice. Maybe a child. It's strangely moving to imagine a 10-year-old practicing sacred knots like someone learning cursive with a blunt stick and high hopes. Obscure tidbit in some highland villages, it's believed that if a quipu unravels, its story escapes into the world and becomes an omen. That's why they're hung, coiled, or sealed anything to keep the past from wandering off unattended. Use it in silence for a while, surrounded by the slow breath of stone. The candle flickers and casts long shadows across the cords. They seem to reach toward each other, as if still telling stories, even now. Before you leave, Tika hands you a piece of spun yarn, dyed in a pattern of earthy brown and soft green. Tie one, he says. Something you won't remembered. You don't ask what he'll do with it. You just tie a knot. Then one more. Then a space. Then a knot that feels different. And then you hand it over, unsure if you've created memory or just a quiet mess. Either way, it stays in the cave. And you walk out a little lighter. Your next destination lies on a low plateau, where the Empire's most overlooked innovation quietly changed the fate of every quip you ever tied to diapets. That's right before a cord could be meaningful. It had to be colorful. And before it could be colorful, it had to be boiled, bathed, barked, or bugged into submission. Natural dyes worm ore than decoration. They were Eta. Red meant one thing. Yellow, another. Blue? That was rare and valuable. So today you're spending time with the dyers, the people who didn't tie the stories, but who gave them their voice. The plateau is warm, the kind of dry that seeps into your fingernails. You're greeted by a group of women crouched over steaming pots. Their hands are stained in more shades than your average paint store. You watch as one stirs a bubbling vat of Kashina lay brilliant reed dye made from tiny crushed beetles. Don't feel bad, she says, noticing your wince. They lived full lives, mostly eating cactus. The dyeing process is both science and sorcery. The water must be just hot enough. The mordant usually alum or urine. Yes, urine must be balanced just so. The wool must be agitated, not tortured. And the drying? That's a whole separate ordeal. You learn that colors weren't chosen at random. They were standardized. A red string meant corn tax. A blue cord suggested water allotment. Yellow? Food stores. Brown, textiles. Green sometimes was used for meter labor. And black? That often meant death, disaster, or royal decree. One woman lets you stir a pot. It smells like damp leaves and ambition. Your wool turns a muddy purple close enough to impress no one, but the attempt is acknowledged with a kind nod. Obscure facts some Incan reed dyes were so strong they could last for centuries without fading. That means if someone tied an embarrassing teenage knot back in 1482, we could still read it. Humbling, really. As the wool dries in the sun, you notice an older woman inspecting a finished quipu. Just not a Quipusi MAOC. Just a color caller, someone who double-minus checks the hue accuracy. If your reed is to pink, your entire village might be taxed incorrectly. And that's how rebellions start. or at least stern letters. She beckons you over and lets you hold a completed cord. It's light but strong, dyed into shades ochre and indigo. She explains that this one is for a traveling message. The colors tell the receiver what type of information to expect before they even touch the knots. It's the ancient equivalent of subject lines in emails. You feel the cord warming your hand, sunlight catching on its twisted strands. You suddenly realize how much communication depends on materials, on trust, on the feel of the thread and the honesty of the dyer. You sit under the open sky with the drying cords fluttering like flags around you. Your breeze smells like hot dye patience. Someone passes a bowl of roasted fava beans. Someone else plays a flute off minor ski. You rest your back against a rock, and everything slows. Not because you're tired though you are, but because this is the kind of work that insists on slowness, that refuses urgency, that believes meaning can only emerge when each knot is tied with care, each thread dyed with intention, each story stored not to be shouted, but to be remembered quietly by those who choose to listen. And for a moment, you feel like you're part of the thread too. Just one loop in something larger. Woven. Worm. And finally still. The road unfurls ahead of you like a well-minus meaning snake twisting, deliberate, and probably hiding more rocks than necessary. You're walking alone this time. Not because anyone left you, but because this part of the journey is meant to be taken quietly. That's what the last color-minus caller told you, with a knowing smile. Next up, you go with your own knots. Charming. You head toward a highland village known not for the beauty of its cords or the complexity of its knots, but for one of the most curious roles in the QuipU system, the verifier. Somewhere between a notary public, an auditor, and your judgmental older cousin, the verifier's job was to make sure the numbers recorded matched the actual reality. Today, the only thing matching is your aching knees to the elevation. When you arrive, the village looks unimpressed. Modest homes, half-minus repaired walls, and a communal square shaped like a lazy potato. But inside one of the stone buildings, a woman greets you with sharp eyes and a cord already in her hand. Her name is Chaska. She has descended from a long line of verifiers. Her family didn't tie new knots, they checked the work of others. She leads you into her home where cords are hung like court documents. There are multiple versions of the same QuipU, all with slight variations. She explains sometimes a knot is tied honestly, but counted wrongly. That's where we came in. As you examine to near minus identical cords, she points out the difference. One has a loose knot at the third tier of a yellow string. That's the difference between 1,000 and 10,000 bundles of quinoa. Small slip. Big famine. This was the role of the verifier, to catch the Empire's little mistakes before they became historical ones. She doesn't call it glamorous. She calls it exhausting. Everyone loves a poet QuipU, she says. No one throws festivals for the one who fixed a decimal point. You get the sense she doesn't mind. Historians often overlook these roles. The spotlight goes to the QuipU CMAOCs, the elite recorders, the ceremonial artists. But behind every empire's rise is someone squinting at the margins and going, wait a second. Chaska invites you to try verifying a simple chord. You run your fingers over it. It's color-minus coded for wool inventory, with a base scored and 5 subsidiaries. She hands you the checklist, a woven tally strip used for training. You get it wrong. Twice. Chaska doesn't laugh. But she does offer you tea. Obscure tidbit of the day in some regions. Verifiers weren't trained from childhood using painted pebbles, not knots. They graduate to chords only after mastering thousands of combinations using these stones. Think of it like flashcards, but older and more likely to sprain your wrist. As you sip your tea, Chaska tells you stories of her grandmother, who once overturned a shipment log after proving that the llamas counted in a village. Quipyu didn't match who Frips at the loading station. She didn't accuse anyone. She just tied a new cord and handed it to the governor. The grain was rerouted. No one starved. No statue was built. Just one more thread in the archive. You sit with Chaska through the afternoon, unraveling simple knots and practicing great eyes under her silent supervision. She doesn't rush. She doesn't praise. At one point, she says the chords remember. But so do we. That's the hard part. Outside, children play with bits of string, inventing games that mimic their parents. Inside, you finish your fourth correction on the same training Quipyu. This one, she nods at. Your e-learning. By sunset, your hands feel wiser than your brain. You leave Chaska's house with no new knot, no ceremonial strand. Just your hands, the memory of tension, and a quiet sense that somewhere along the thread, you've become a tiny part of the system too. You don't tell the wind this. It already knows. You spend the night in a hut built into the edge of a cliff. The wind whistles through the walls like a bored musician, and somewhere outside, a fox yelps with the commitment of someone filing a complaint. You dream of chords again, some tight, some unraveling, some whispering things you can't quite translate. By morning, the sky is a dull silver, and the trail calls once more. Today you're headed towards something even rarer than a poetic Quipyu or a master verifier. You're seeking out what some call the phantom not squipus that may not have existed at all, or at least, not in the way we think. The journey leads you through cloud forest. Moss minus draped in damp, with orchids clinging to trees like shy thoughts. The trail is slick, and your sandals are now emotionally compromised. You slip once and are caught by a passing mule, who judges you silently and continues on its way. Eventually, you arrive at a stone hut with no roof. There's an old man sitting beside a fire, chewing coke and leaves with the patience of someone waiting for a prophecy. AGS known simply as Who Are I. No one knows if that's his real name. No one asks. Who Are I is what some might call a Quipyu skeptic. Not that he doubts their existence, he doubts their completeness. He believes there were entire types of Quipus we no longer understand. Some nuts were tied in thought, he says, tapping his temple. Invisible threads. Concepts. Songs. You sit with him as he pulls out a bundle not a Quipyu, but a series of smooth chords without a single knot. Blank. Unmarked. He calls it a Pacha Quipyu a time thread. These were carried by those who waited, he explains. Not to record what was, but what might be. Prophecies. Warnings. Hopes. There is no proof these existed. No Spanish record mentions them. No surviving examples have been confirmed. Some scholars dismiss the idea entirely. But Uaara shrugs. Not everything is for proof, he says. Some things are for balance. He hands you one of the blank chords and asks what you see. You see string. He nods. Good. Now hold it longer. You do. And slowly, very slowly, you begin to feel the shape of possibility. Not actual memory. Not story. But the intention of one. The idea that something could be tied here. Might be tied here. A future waiting for tension. Obscure tidbit in a few Andean myth cycles, the universe is described as a cord held by the sun god. When it loosens, time unravels. When it tightens, fate advances. So maybe Hori's thread isn't that far off. As the day deepens, Hua'arai tells stories not ones he remembers, but ones he imagines were never told. A storm that didn't come. A wedding that almost happened. A famine avoided. He says these are the anti-minus, that's the blanks that hold space for what never was. You don't argue. Not because you believe, but because sitting with him feels like sitting beside an ancient theory made human. I soft resistance to the hard edges of history. By the time you leave, the thread he gave you remains untied. You wind it carefully and place it beside your wrist quipu. It doesn't feel empty. It feels waiting. You walk back down the trail slowly, the forest beginning to close in behind you. The mule passes again, still unimpressed. That night, as you lie under the thick stars, you finally begin to feel what this journey has been about, not just decoding knots or reading history, but learning to listen to silence. To the parts of memory no one speaks aloud. The story's left untied. The next day, you'll return to Cuzco. But for now, you let the blank cord rest in your palm, the stars blinking gently above, as if in agreement. Cuzco returns to you not with trumpets, but with footsteps. Familiar ones. The worn stone streets. The hum of conversations half-minus understood. The sharp, slightly judgmental calls of market birds. You arrive just before dusk, your sandals thinner and your wrist quip you a little more frayed than before. But you're back carrying more knots in your mind than in your pack. The city breathes differently than the highland villages. It's denser, louder, more restless. But beneath its stones, you know because you've felt it that this was once the capital of a world woven not in ink or conquest, but in string. You make your way to a shaded courtyard behind a former temple, now used as a study house. There, a gathering of the last true Quipu scholars meets regularly not just to study chords, but to debate them into oblivion. You're invited to sit in. The room is crowded with woven bundles, suspended cords, worn journals, and half-minus drunk bowls of coca tea. You meet Adon, the lead scholar, who wears 3 quipas wrapped around his shoulder like a sash of responsibility and regret. He greets you with the weary smile of someone who's been trying to translate silence into meaning for most of his adult life. He holds up a quipu, one of the oldest still intact, they believe. Dyed mostly in black and brown, with only a single red cord weaving through like a rogue idea. This one, he explains, is either a military supply report or a death ritual. You raise a brow. He shrugs. We can read the numbers. We cannot read the context. This is the heart of the problem, and the beauty of it. The Inca didn't write a Rosetta Stone for their strings. The Spanish, in their panic and misunderstanding, burned thousands of cords. Those that remain just over 1,000, spread across museums and collections, are fragments. Phrases in a lost language. Or worse, receipts with no buyer and no seller. Adon believes the keel eyes and cross-minus referencing. Some scholars are building databases of surviving quipas, mapping color, not type spacing, and possible geographic origin. Machine learning has even entered the chat. Still, progress is slow. Historians still debate whether there was a phonetic system embedded in the not-say-true written language, or if quipas were purely mnemonic memory triggers rather than readable text. We may never know at unsize. We may be one knot away. You sit through a series of friendly arguments. Was that yellow court meant to represent maize? Or a town called Amarilla? Is a double-minus I'd note a correction or a sign of emphasis? One woman insists that the pattern of a certain quipu mirrors the lunar cycle. Another counters that it's just a shipment of llama dung spaced over 3 months. It's hard to say who's right. And maybe that's the point. Obscure tidbit: one surviving quipu found in Pirochuco, Peru, is believed to be a master kie kind of index used to interpret other quipas. If that's true, it would be the only ancient analog catalog system in string form. A librarian's fevered dream. Adon invites you to hold a bundle still under analysis. It's dense, over 1,200 chords, each tied with mathematical precision. This, he says, tells the story of an empire's rhythm. Or maybe it just counts fish. You're asking what he thinks quipas feel like. Not what they say. Not what they store. But what they are. He thinks for a long moment. Obedient memory, he replies. They hold exactly what they're told. No more. No less. As evening comes, the courtyard fills with golden light. A few of the scholars begin softly tying demonstration knots for visitors. You stay back, watching, your fingers brushing the edge of your own modest thread. It doesn't speak, but it listens. You spend the night in Cusco's old quarter, in a room built atop Inca stonework now hidden behind Spanish facades. The walls feel like they remember more than the stories you've heard. The floor creaks with the weight of invisible ancestors. Or maybe just poorly fitted beams. You fall asleep under a roof of tile, but dream in terraces and thread. The next morning, your final stop is not a village, not a field, not a ruin. It's a museum. Yes. Glass cases. Climate control. Clean labels with questionable translations. You've been offered a private tour by a curator named Sarai, who greets you with the suspicious cheerfulness of someone who's been trying to explain indigenous mathematics to tourists for 2 decades. She walks you through the main gallery, where a dozen quipas hang like frozen conversations. These are only the ones we can display, she explains. Most are still undergoing conservation. Or arguments. You stop at one encased in glass, its cords dyed in deep purples and faded orange. It's thought to come from the southern valleys. Sarai says it's probably a labor record, but no one's entirely sure. That's the phrase we use most here, she laughs. Probably, but no one's entirely sure. She leads you to a side room, a research wing closed to the public. There, under low lighting, you find shelves and drawers labeled with numbers and letters. It smells like dust, hope, and very old wool. Here, Sarai shows you fragments, partial cords, broken threads, knotted tassels without their base string. Orphans of memory. Some look like tangled necklaces, others like unraveling spiders. These are what remain when Empire ends and no one volunteers to keep tying. Obscure fact: a few missionaries in the 16th century attempted to create their own Christian quipas cords that taught Bible verses using adapted knot systems. Unsurprisingly, it didn't catch on. Turns out, eternal salvation is hard to teach in binary string. Sarai places one such failed quipu in your hands. It's stiff, overdyed. The knots too symmetrical. It feels like someone was trying to force a sacred rhythm into a Western metronome. She watches you turn it over. They never understood that the meaning wasn't just in the knots, she says. It was in the relationship. Between the person, the thread, the memory. That's what they erased. And what we're trying slowly to remember. Before you leave, Sarai opens one last drawer. Inside lies a modern quipu dyed recently, modeled after the old forms, but invented anew. This, she says, was made last year by a weaver in Pisac. She tied the story of the pandemic. 1 knot per day she spent alone. It's long, simple, and devastating. You touch the final knot tighter than the rest. The end of something. You leave the museum quietly, blinking into sunlight. The streets of Cuzco bustle as they always do. But now you see lines everywhere, threads between people, stories between homes, chords of sound, movement, memory. You sit at the edge of a plaza, untying your sandals with slow hands. And for a while, you just watch the threads move around you. None of them speak, but all of them say something. You leave Cuzco before dawn, long before the tourists gather at the fountain or the bread carts roll out onto the cobbled streets. The sky is still bruised with night. You step carefully, your breath visible in the thin morning air, your small bundle of threads tucked inside your tunic like a quiet pulse. This is the last part of the journey in ascent, not into altitude, but into stillness. You're headed for a solitary ridge, once used by Inca stargazers and seasonal watchers. Not an observatory, exactly more like a stone altar to time. They called it an Ihuatana, a place to tie the sun. Not literally, of course, but symbolically, ritually. In a culture built on knots, even the sun was bound by thread. The trail is worn and unmarked. You pass no one, just the wind and the growing brightness. The stones crunch beneath your feet in a steady rhythm, like the last lines of a poem that has taken hours to speak. When you arrive, there's nothing much to see. Just a carved rock. Flat, sloped, surrounded by low stone walls. A few tufts of grass growing where ceremony once stood. This was where priests once marked the solstice, where they tied cords to stakes and watched shadows stretch across seasons. They believed the sun could be fastened. Not stopped exactly, but honored like a guest you hope will stay a little longer. Use it on the warm rock. Pull the bundle of thread from your tunic, and untie it, knot by knot. Each one slow, careful. A reversal. A soft goodbye. It's said that to untie a quipu is to release the memory back into the world. Not to erase it, but to return it. To let it move. You lay the untied cord on the stone. It doesn't flutter. It simply waits. You reach into your pocket and pull out Huari's blank thread. The pachaquipu, still unknotted. You tie a single knot. Not for data. Not for loss. Just to mark that you were here. Obscure tidbit in some Quechua dialects. The word for noke hipu is also used to mean connection. Relationship. Union. Even love. As if every story tied is a form of belonging. You remain on the ridge for hours, watching the sun, the shadows, the small things that move slowly when you stop long enough to see them. No one joins you. No one needs to. Because some stories are meant to end in quiet places with no applause, no captions, and no translation. Just one final note, and the sound of wind through stone. So now, you've walked the roads that remembered more than they revealed. You've touched cords woven by hands that never wrote a word, yet never forgot a thing. You've met the boy who delivered the census, the woman who tied the celebration, the elder who recited from memory, and the skeptic who believed the future could be knotted gently like a promise. And now you rest. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breath settle. Let your thoughts coil themselves gently, like sleeping threads. The world you traveled through tonight is quiet not because it lacks meaning, but because it held so much of it in silence. Think of the sun, gently tied to a stone. Think of 1,000 cords swaying like wind chimes in an empire without ink. Think of the threads in your own life, the ones you've tied, the ones you've let go, the ones still dangling. Each knot a moment. Each moment remembered. Tonight, you don't need to understand all the meanings. You only need to let them rest. Close your eyes. The strings will hold. Good night.